Jane Morgan pushed open the glass door of Brightwave Publishing, just as the first light of morning crept over the city skyline. Her heart beat a little faster at the thought of the big deadline ahead. Today, she had to send the final draft of her team's marketing proposal to a major client, and every detail had to be perfect. She carried her laptop bag in one hand and a travel mug of coffee in the other, the warm steam rising in gentle swirls. She had come early on purpose, hoping to have the quiet of an empty office to review her slides one last time. As she walked through the hall, the soft click of her heels echoed off the walls. The office was still and calm, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. She paused at the reception desk where the security guard offered her a polite nod, but said nothing. In the large open space beyond, rows of desks sat empty, each with its own computer and neatly stacked papers. The silence felt like a gift, a rare moment before the bustle of the day would fill the halls. Jane turned toward the printers and copiers at the back of the room. That was her first stop. She needed hard copies to share with her team before the presentation at 10. She hoped the machines would cooperate. She stepped into the small printer room, a cramped space lined with shelves of paper reams and ink cartridges. She tapped a button on the big copier and waited. The machine word rollers spun, and then it stopped with an annoyed beep. A little red light blinked, and a small note appeared on its screen. Paper jam. Jane sighed and leaned in too. Inspect the problem. She carefully opened the tray and fished out a crumpled sheet that had bent in the feed mechanism. As she pulled it free, she heard a calm voice behind her say, "Here, let me help." She straightened and saw a man wearing plain coveralls and a cap. He held a small toolkit in one hand and a roll of tape in the other. "Oh, thank you," Jane said, stepping aside. "I'm Jane. I work in marketing," she offered a quick smile, but then kept her gaze on the copier. She assumed he was the new daytime janitor, or perhaps a repairman from outside. He looked like someone who spent his days moving quietly through buildings, fixing small problems without asking for thanks. He knelt before the copier, opening panels with practiced ease. He worked with steady hands, as if the machine were an old friend. Jane watched him for a moment, surprised by how calm he seemed. He clicked off a small broken part and slipped in a fresh one. Then he closed the tray and tapped a few buttons. The copier hummed back to life and printed a test page without error. "There you go," he said, rising to his feet. His voice was gentle and even. He handed her the printed page. "All set." Jane took the paper and smiled. "You're amazing. I've been staring at that jam for 5 minutes and couldn't fix it." She offered him the coffee she still held. "Can I get you a drink? Coffee? Tea? Anything?" He shook his head and tucked his toolkit under one arm. "I've got an early start today, so I'll pass, but thanks." He paused and looked around. "The empty room. You must have a big day ahead." She nodded, still watching him. "Yes, very big. I need to deliver these copies to my team in 10 minutes. You saved me." She tucked the sheet into her folder and closed the copier's door. Behind her, he gave a small smile, happy to help, and he walked away without another word. Jane straightened her blouse and took a deep breath. She felt a surge of energy from seeing how someone else cared about a small problem in the office. Carried the papers back to her desk and laid them out neatly. The copy he fixed looked perfect crisp ink, straight edges. She tapped at her keyboard to send the final file, grinning at how smooth everything felt now. Over the next few minutes, Jane gathered pens and Post-its and arranged them beside her laptop. She thought about the man in coveralls. She wondered what his name was. She tried to imagine him in a different role, maybe a technician from the building's maintenance team, or a temp brought in to fill a gap. She decided he would be someone she would quietly remember as the helpful repairman. The office began to wake up. Lights flicked on in other rooms, and the hum of computers filled the air. Jane's colleagues drifted in one by one, yawning and stretching. They greeted her with sleepy smiles, and she handed them the copies they needed. As they gathered around her desk, she felt the familiar camaraderie of her team. They shared jokes about the copier acting up and agreed that early mornings were always the hardest part of the workday. Jane stood before the conference room door, ready to lead the meeting. She clutched her folder tight, her heartbeat steady and confident. She glanced back toward the printer area, but the man in coveralls was gone. She shrugged and stepped into the bright room, flipping on the projector. The room filled with her team's faces, expectant and eager. She began her presentation smoothly, her voice strong. She talked about market trends, key data points, and the creative strategy they had developed. Her team nodded, and she saw their respect in their eyes. The hours passed in a blur of slides and discussion. At one point, the copier in the corner printed extra handouts, and she smiled at how nothing had gone wrong since that morning. She thought again of the man who had fixed it and felt grateful. When the meeting ended, Jane walked back to her desk, her energy still high. She had done her job well, and the client was scheduled to receive the proposal by the end of the day. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the calm after a storm of tasks. Then she stood and stretched, her mind already turning to the next set of deadlines. She decided to take a quick break. She headed to the small kitchenette with her empty coffee mug. As she poured fresh brew, the aroma filled her lungs. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply. When she opened them again, she saw the man in coveralls standing by the sink washing his hands. His presence startled her because she had not noticed him since the meeting. He gave her a nod. "Looks like things went well." Jane blinked. She frowned and said, "You're back. Thought you left hours ago." She studied him curiously. "You work here?" He dried his hands and tucked the towel into his waistband. "I do," he said. "I just have a lot of ground to cover. It's part of my routine." He paused and looked at her eyes. "I like to see how things run when nobody expects it." Jane found her voice. "I'm Jane." He held out his hand and smiled. Avery. The name caught her off guard. It did not sound like the name of a janitor, but she said nothing, and let his words hang in the air. She filled her mug and took a sip, then leaned on the counter. "Avery, what is your job title here?" Took a breath and met her gaze. "I'm a maintenance manager." His voice was steady. "Take care of small problems around the building so the rest of you can do your work." Jane nodded slowly. Still thinking of his ease with the copier. "Well, you do it very well." She smiled. He nodded and turned away to leave. As he walked out, Jane called softly, "Thank you, Avery." He paused at the door, glanced back over his shoulder, and offered a small wave before disappearing into the hall. Jane watched him go, her mind buzzing with questions. Who was this man who fixed her copier with such skill and kindness? And why did she feel like today's meeting had run more smoothly because of his quiet help? She returned to her desk and sat down, determined to learn more about her new coworker. But first, she had to send the client that final file. She hit send on her email and felt a thrill of relief. Today had started with a jammed copier and ended in success. Jane smiled at the thought that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could make the biggest difference. Over the next few days, Jane could not stop thinking about Avery. Each morning, she arrived early and scanned the office for his familiar coveralls. Sure enough, he would appear somewhere, a loose ceiling tile here, a flickering light bulb there. He moved quietly through the building, and Jane watched him with growing curiosity. She realized that he was more than a simple maintenance worker. He had an easy way of sharing a joke or a kind word with whoever crossed his path. One afternoon, Jane left her department's conference room and heard raised voices down the hall. She hurried to see what was happening. In the elevator lobby, a young intern named Mark stood red-faced, trapped between the elevator doors that refused to close. The elevator light blinked, doors open. Mark had his arm inside the gap, trying to nudge the door with his elbow. He yanked back hastily at the sound of a sharp snap, then winced and rubbed his wrist. Just then, Jane heard a familiar shuffling of footsteps. Avery stepped forward, calm as ever. He examined the doors, then placed his toolbox on the floor. He pressed a small panel beside the doors, tested the buttons, and opened the maintenance. Hatch above, deft fingers. He reset the mechanism and eased the doors together. They slid shut without a hitch, and the elevator chimed. Mark gave a relieved smile and cautiously stepped in. The doors closed fully this time, and the elevator descended. "Thank you," Mark said, his voice trembling. "I thought I'd be stuck there all afternoon." Avery smiled kindly. No problem. The mechanism sometimes sticks if it doesn't get enough use, he said. Here, let me help you out. He handed Mark a small pamphlet that said elevator safety tips, printed on Brightwave stationery. Mark nodded gratefully and took the pamphlet. Jane watched from a few feet away, impressed by how quietly and confidently Avery handled the situation. He didn't seem to mind that everyone called him the janitor. He just did his work and moved on. Jane realized that his small acts made a big difference to people he might never see again. Later that day, Jane's colleague Priya approached her desk, looking upset. She explained that her computer had crashed, and she had lost an hour of writing on the draft proposal. Priya looked ready to cry. Jane offered to help, but Priya shook her head, too nervous to risk opening Excel again. I've tried everything, she said, her eyes filling with tears. I saved it, but it's gone. As they spoke, Jane noticed Avery emerge from the supply closet down the hall, carrying a stack of printer paper. He overheard Priya's distress and stopped. What happened? He asked gently. Priya sniffled. My files. They just vanished. Avery nodded and motioned for them to follow. He led them to a small back office where the servers hummed, opened a locked cabinet, pulled out a laptop loaded with diagnostic tools, and plugged in Priya's flash drive. They watched a progress bar crawl across the screen as the software recovered Priya's unsaved file from a hidden temp folder. In moments, her lost words reappeared on the screen. Priya gasped and covered her. Mouth you found it? She whispered. He nodded. Sometimes the system keeps backups you don't know about, he said. He saved the recovered file to her USB, then copied it to the server so it would be safe. Priya hugged her folder to her chest. Thank you so much, she said, eyes shining. I don't know how to repay you. Avery shrugged modestly. I'll just keep doing good work, he said. Then he placed the laptop back in the cabinet and locked it again. He waved, smiled, and walked away, leaving Jane and Priya staring after him in awe. Jane felt a spark of admiration. Avery always worked in the background, without fanfare or praise. He fixed what needed fixing, and then vanished again. His world was small acts of care that made the office hum more smoothly. By the end of that week, Jane realized that Avery had touched nearly every part of the building. She saw him on the roof checking air vents in the lunchroom, cleaning up a spill before anyone else noticed, and in the lobby, adjusting the thermostat so the chilly drafts disappeared. Wherever there was a small problem, he appeared like a silent guardian. During a Friday afternoon coffee break, Jane summoned the courage to join Avery. She found him by the snack station, wiping stray crumbs from beneath the counter. She carried 2 paper cups, one filled with coffee, the other with hot chocolate. Avery, she said softly, offering them both. I got you something. He looked up, a faint surprise in his eyes. He accepted the coffee and nodded his. Thanks. Jane took the hot chocolate and leaned against the counter. I wanted to say thanks for everything you've done here, she said, flattening the lid on her cup. You've helped so many people this week. He smiled and took a sip, his eyes crinkled. Sometimes small things matter most, he replied. Jane nodded, her heart warming. I agree. I never thought a copier jam would end up teaching. Me that, he chuckled. It's all connected. The copier jam, the elevator, the servers. If one piece breaks, the whole day can feel off. I just try to keep things running so everyone else can do their best work. Jane watched him drink his coffee, amazed again by his calm kindness. She realized that he probably knew little about marketing proposals or board reports, yet he cared about their lives as if he faced similar deadlines each day. He made the office feel human. As they talked, a group of new interns walked by. They hesitated at the doorway, unsure of the rules about entering the snack area. Avery noticed and gestured them in. Help yourselves, he said, pointing at the bins of fruit and granola bars. The interns relaxed, smiled, and thanked him. They filled their cups with filtered water and chose snacks before moving on. Jane followed them with her eyes. She thought about how Avery treated everyone in turns, executives, contractors, with the same warmth and respect. He seemed to believe that no one was too small or too unimportant to deserve kindness. Later that afternoon, Jane sat at her desk and looked out the window as the sun began to set. She saw the city lights flicker on. Her mind kept returning to Avery's gentle voice and quiet competence. She felt inspired. She reached for her notebook and began to jot down ideas for how her marketing team could incorporate more human stories into their next campaign. She thought about using everyday heroes, people like Avery, to show how small acts can have big impact. She paused and drew a large question mark beside her notes. Then she underlined it. Who is Avery really? She had heard the maintenance manager title, but his skill with technology, his easy way with people, and his sense of timing felt unusual. She decided she had to learn more about him. Maybe she could invite him to join the team's next brainstorming session, or at least thank him more properly. That evening, she left the office later than usual, her head full of ideas. As she packed her bag, she saw Avery lock the supply closet and begin his final rounds. He checked the exit doors, tested the security system, and turned off the lights. In the main hallway, when he reached her cubicle area, he paused. "Have a good evening, Jane," he said. Jane smiled broadly. "You too, Avery. And thanks again, really." He nodded and continued his walk, never looking back. Jane watched him disappear into the corridor. She closed her laptop lid, gathered her things, and headed to the elevator. As the doors closed, she thought how strange and wonderful it was that the man she thought was a simple repairman had become the most interesting person in her day. She rode down in silence, her mind buzzing with questions and plans. Tomorrow, she would ask around about him. Maybe the reception desk would know more, or human resources. Whatever the source, Jane was determined to find out who Avery truly was and perhaps uncover a story far more remarkable than any marketing pitch she could write. ChatGPT said. Jane arrived at the office early again, her mind spinning with questions about Avery. As she stepped through the glass doors, she tapped her badge and saw the security guard, Mr. Heller, glancing up from his desk. She paused before he could speak and asked, "Good morning, Mr. Heller. Do you know anything about our maintenance manager, Avery Thornton?" Looked surprised by the question, put down his coffee and leaned back in his chair. "Avery," he said slowly. "He's been with the company for a while. Quiet fellow. Keeps to himself." Jane pressed on. "Do you know where he came from? Did he work somewhere before Brightwave?" Mr. Heller shrugged. "Not much I can. Share company likes to keep personnel files private. But he's reliable. Never misses a day." She thanked him and walked toward the break room. Her heart felt heavier with each step. She realized she knew almost nothing about a man who had become the most important part of her day. She opened the fridge and poured herself a cup of coffee. The aroma settled her nerves. Across the room, Priya and Mark were talking in low voices. Jane approached them. "Do either of you know more about Avery?" she asked. Priya shook her head. "I just know he fixed my computer crash." She rolled her eyes. "He's like a wizard. But no one knows his background." Mark nodded. "I asked around in it. They say he's not an in-house tech. It's listed under maintenance. That's all." Jane sipped her coffee, feeling the weight of mystery pressing in. She decided she would learn what she could before the big board meeting on Friday. Rumor had it that the CEO would make a surprise appearance. Could it be Avery? The thought made her pulse quicken. All morning, Jane watched Avery from a distance. She saw him help the janitorial staff push a heavy cart of trash bags. Then she caught him installing new batteries in the fire alarm panel. His movements were precise, and his eyes reflected focus and care. He seemed more than a handyman. He seemed to understand the heart of the building itself. At lunch, she found him sitting alone on a bench in a small courtyard behind the office. The sun warmed the stone floor, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of a lone tree. Jane carried her salad and joined him. He looked up, surprised to see her sitting beside him. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, placing her lunch bag on the bench. He offered a polite smile. "Not at all." They ate in comfortable silence. Jane watched him carefully. She wondered what he would say if she asked him about his life before Brightwave. Finally, she found the courage to speak. "Avery, I hope I don't offend you, but I'm curious what led you to maintenance work." He paused, studying a bird perched on the courtyard railing. Then he looked back at her. "I like helping people," he said simply. "I like solving small problems." Jane nodded. "Get that. But you solve more than small problems, Avery. You fixed my copier, saved Priya's work, even rescued Mark from the elevator. You're like a silent hero." He chuckled softly. "I prefer quiet." Jane hesitated. "Can I ask, did you study engineering?" "A corret." He looked away, his gaze drifting to the tree's leaves. "I've had different paths," he said. "Life teaches you many things." She sensed he was keeping a secret, but didn't push further. Instead, she smiled and said, "Well, I appreciate what you do here. You make this place better." He nodded and returned to his food. After a moment, he stood. "Gotta get back," he said. "There's a flickering light in the third-floor hallway. I better check it before anyone trips." Jane watched him go, his coveralls catching the sunlight. She felt a strange mix of admiration and frustration. She wanted to know the real Avery Thornton. But he wouldn't give up his story easily. Back at her desk, she opened her email. There was a message from the company newsletter announcing that the CEO would visit tomorrow morning. The note asked staff to gather in the main lobby at 9 for a special announcement. Jane felt her pulse pound. She reread the email. No name was given for the CEO. Could it be him? All afternoon, she tried to focus on her work, but her mind drifted to Avery. She checked the lobby camera feed on her computer and saw a man in a suit standing off screen. Moments later, a flash of bright sunlight reflected off polished shoes. She paused the video and zoomed in. The shoes were too formal for maintenance polished leather, not scuffed work boots. Her breath caught. She closed the feed. Her heart felt like it would burst. If she was right, then Avery, the man in coveralls, was actually the CEO in disguise. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She had admired him as a helper and friend, but what would it mean if he was her boss? Her phone buzzed. 8. Was Priya? "Hey, are you coming to the lobby for the CEO announcement?" she asked. Jane stared at the screen and typed back, "Yes, I'll see you there." She stood and stretched, trying to shake off the dizzy feeling. She walked toward the lobby, pausing at every corner to see if Avery passed by, but he was nowhere in sight. The lobby grew crowded with people in suits and dresses. Jane wove through the crowd, her eyes scanning for someone in coveralls. No luck. The crowd hushed as the elevator doors slid open. A man stepped out wearing a dark suit and carrying a briefcase. He walked slowly to the podium, and people applauded politely. Watched as he removed his jacket, revealing a crisp white shirt and tie. He smiled warmly. The spotlight hit his face, and Jane felt her breath catch. It was not who she expected, but there was something familiar in his eyes. He cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone," he said. "Thank you for coming." The crowd quieted. Jane strained to see his name tag. She couldn't read it from where she stood. She glanced at Priya, whose eyes widened. Jane realized that Priya had watched Avery in the courtyard. Could she recognize him too? The man continued, "Today I want to share a new initiative. We will start a program called Hands-On Leadership. Once a month, a member of our executive team will work in a different department, side by side with you, to solve real problems." Loud applause followed. Jane felt a thrill run through her. The program sounded like exactly what Avery had been doing all along, helping people quietly, learning their challenges. Suddenly it made perfect sense. After the applause died down, the man left the podium and walked toward the crowd. People snapped photos and shook his hand. Jane pushed forward, her heart racing. As he approached her, she realized why his eyes felt familiar. They were the same eyes that had looked at her in the courtyard, the same eyes that had guided her through a jammed copier. She took a deep breath. "Excuse me?" she said as he passed. He stopped and looked at her. "I'm Jane Morgan, marketing manager," she said, her voice unsteady. "Thank you for everything you've done in the office. You really understand people's struggles." He smiled knowingly. "I'm glad you noticed," he said. "I believe a leader should know every part of the company." Her heart leaped. "Then, you're—" He reached out and gently removed the glass door. Badge from his lapel. It read, "Avery Thornton, CEO." Jane gasped and felt her knees go weak. She blinked, then smiled in awe. He offered his hand. "Nice to finally introduce myself properly," he said. She took his hand, feeling the warmth of it. The crowd around them seemed to fade. In that moment, Jane understood that Avery's quiet kindness and skill had been part of his plan all along, to learn from the ground up, to see the company with fresh eyes. And she realized that her own life and her work would never be the same. As the crowd surged forward, she let go of his hand and stepped back, her mind racing with new ideas. The new program would change everything, and she had witnessed the true power of leadership in disguise. The hum of conversation filled the lobby as Jane Morgan stepped back, her mind still spinning from Avery Thornton's revelation. He smiled at her once more, then raised his hand in a brief wave before moving deeper into the crowd. Jane watched him go, feeling as though she had just seen a different world shift into place. She gripped her notepad tightly, her heart pounding as other employees swarmed around him. Cameras flashed, people shook his hand and whispered words of thanks, followed him like a trail of soft sparks. Jane stood still for a moment, absorbing the scene. The CEO, no longer hidden in coveralls, moved with an easy confidence. He greeted every person as if they were a friend. He stopped to chat with the security guard at the desk, joking about early morning shifts. He patted the receptionist's shoulder and asked how her morning was. He paused before the elevator bank and spoke quietly with a group of interns. Everywhere he went, he listened, did not glance at his watch or rush away. He seemed to care about each small moment and each small person. Jane felt a deep admiration bloom in her chest. When the crowd finally parted, Jane found herself standing in a pocket of space near the entrance. She swallowed and took a deep breath. The leather-bound notebook in her hand felt heavier than usual. She opened it and scribbled a few words. Hands-on leadership. Beneath that, she wrote, "Learn from the front lines." She thought of all the broken machines Avery had fixed, all the small crises he had soothed. She thought of how each act of kindness had built trust and respect. She realized that this new program would change the way everyone in the company saw each other. A loud voice broke through her thoughts. "Jane, there you are." She turned to see Priya weaving through the crowd with Mark close behind her. Both of them had the same excited look in their eyes that Jane felt in her own heart. Priya carried a smart tablet, and Mark clutched a stack of papers. "Did you catch that?" Priya asked, breathless. "He's really going to work with different teams each month? This is huge." Mark nodded vigorously. "I can't believe he was the same man fixing our copier. I thought he was just maintenance." "Staff," Jane smiled. "I know. I saw it too." She closed her notebook and slipped it into her bag. "This program will mean that every team gets a chance to show him what they do, and he'll get to learn from us." Priya's eyes shone. "I have so many ideas. What if he spends a day in marketing, or maybe even shadow the customer? Support team?" Jane laughed softly. "I was thinking the same thing. And we should be ready for him. We need to make a great impression, and we need to learn from him." Mark looked confused. "Learn from him? He's the CEO." Jane shook her head. "Exactly. He's going to see how our teams work. We can learn how to solve problems by watching him solve ours. Want to propose a workshop or a talk after he finishes each visit?" Priya tapped her tablet. "I'll draft an email this afternoon to HR and CCU. Let's suggest that idea. Do you?" Jane nodded and glanced around. The lobby was beginning to clear. Most employees were returning to their desks, buzzing about what they had just witnessed. A few lingered to take photos with the CEO, and others chatted in small groups near the windows. Jane felt a thrill. For the first time in months, she felt a fresh sense of purpose. She thought back to how her team had struggled with a tight deadline, how the copier jam had nearly thrown everything off track. She realized that small technical problems could have big effects, and that a leader's willingness to jump in and help could lift everyone's spirits. She glanced at the time. It was almost 11. Her team's weekly check-in meeting would start in 15 minutes. She hurried toward the elevators, her heels clicking on the polished stone floor. She stepped inside and watched the numbers light up as she ascended to the 4th floor. When the doors opened, she saw her team gathered around the conference table, mugs of coffee in hand. Jane called Tom, her project lead. He held a printed agenda. "Glad you made it. You were just about to start." Jane smiled and took her seat at the head of the table. She placed her bag on the floor and set her notebook on the table. Everyone looked at her expectantly. She could feel their curiosities. Some whispered about the surprise announcement in the lobby. Jane cleared her throat and tapped the table for attention. "Good morning, everyone. Before we dive into our status updates, I want to share something exciting. We just learned that Avery Thornton, our CEO, will be starting a new program called Hands-On Leadership. Once a month, he will join a different team on site, working side by side to solve real problems." A murmur ran around the table. Some people exchanged surprised looks. Others grinned and leaned forward. "What do you think?" Jane asked. Priya raised her hand and said, "I think it's amazing. It shows he cares about our work and our challenges," Mark added. "It also means we can get direct feedback from him. We should prepare a list of issues we'd like him to help with." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "Good point. But more than that, I think we should come ready to show him what we do behind the scenes. He'll learn from us too." Jane agreed. "Exactly. This is a two-way street. We'll learn leadership by example by watching him, and he'll learn about our daily work. I want us to think of questions we can ask him, maybe set up a mini workshop." Tom tapped his pen. "Let's brainstorm. What do we want to ask him?" For the next 20 minutes, the team threw out ideas. They wanted to know how he handles stress, how he makes decisions under pressure, what motivates him, and how he stays passionate about small details. They also wanted to show him their creative process, their data analysis tools, and their brainstorming techniques. Jane scribbled notes on her notebook, her mind racing with possibilities. At the end of the meeting, she gathered up the pages and stood. "Great work, everyone. I'll send these notes to HR and suggest we set up a time for Avery's visit. In the meantime, let's keep doing what we do best, making great marketing campaigns." As her team dispersed, Jane felt a warm glow. She thought of Avery standing in coveralls, solving problems with a quiet smile. And then stepping onto the stage as CEO, she realized that leadership was not just a title, it was a series of small, caring acts that added up to something powerful. She packed her bag and headed back to her desk. On the way, she passed the copier area. The machine hummed contentedly as if nothing had ever gone wrong. She smiled and patted its side lightly. "We'll have you ready," she whispered. When she sat down, her inbox had a message from HR. They asked her to fill out a quick form, suggesting teams and projects for the Hands-On Leadership program. Jane clicked the link and began to type suggestions. Marketing, IT, customer support. In the server room, she typed, "These teams would benefit from Avery's expertise. We hope to learn from his approach to solving problems." She paused. Then she added a final line. "Thank you for making this possible." She hit send and leaned back in her chair. The afternoon sun streamed in through the window, casting a golden glow over her desk. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The day had started with a copier jam and ended with a new vision for her work and her team. She felt ready for any challenge. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a calendar invite from Priya. Brainstorm session with Avery Thornton, CEO marketing team, scheduled for next Wednesday at 10. Jane smiled and accepted the invite. She felt a thrill of anticipation as the office lights dimmed. For sunset, Jane packed her things and headed toward the exit. She thought of Avery making his rounds one more time, fixing a door latch here, replacing a burnt-out bulb there before changing into his suit to address the company. She thought of how he bridged the gap between the floor and the boardroom. She thought of how one man's kindness could inspire an entire organization. She stepped outside into the cool evening air and looked up at the glowing windows of Brightwave. She felt a sense of pride and hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, of course, but thanks to Avery's example, she knew they would face them together, and that every small act of care would help build something greater than the sum of its parts. She smiled and walked home, her mind already planning how she would make the next hands-on leadership workshop the best learning opportunity ever. She woke early on the day of the workshop, her heart fluttering with excitement. The sun had barely climbed above the rooftops when Jane Morgan slipped into her office. The hall was quiet, lit only by soft morning light spilling through the windows. She set down her bag, smoothed her skirt, and checked the conference room one last time. Brightwave's conference room looked ready, tables arranged in a U shape. Fresh markers on the whiteboard, mugs of coffee waiting on a side table. Jane took a deep breath. Today, Avery would join her team and learn how marketing worked from the inside. She remembered the first time she had met Avery in coveralls, fixing the copier. Back then, she had no idea he was the CEO. Now she sat at the head of the table, armed with a notepad full of questions and a plan to guide the session. Jane glanced at her reflection in the glass door. She felt calm and confident. She had prepared well. Her team had to. Slowly, her colleagues trickled in. Priya carried a tablet. Mark held a stack of printed slides, and Tom arranged name tents on the table. Others brought their laptops and notebooks. They greeted each other with quiet smiles, aware that this morning would be special. They had practiced their presentations and prepared to share their challenges. Jane felt a swell of pride in her team's readiness. At exactly 10, the door opened and Avery Thornton entered. His suit was crisp, his tie neat, but his eyes shone with that same warmth Jane had seen when he knelt before the copier. He paused in the doorway, surveying the room with a friendly smile. For a moment, everyone simply looked at him, amazed that their leader had come to work alongside them. He stepped forward and reached out to Jane. "Good morning, everyone," he said. His voice was calm and even, but carried a sense of authority. "Thank you for inviting me into your world today." He shook hands with Jane, then turned to greet Priya, Mark, Tom, and the rest of the team. Asked each of them how they were, and made a small joke about waking up before the coffee machine. Jane closed the door and motioned for everyone to sit. She felt a thrill as she watched Avery settle into a chair among them. She opened her notebook and said, "Today is about sharing our work and learning from one another. We'll start with a quick overview of our roles. Then we have questions for you, Avery. Finally, you'll try a few tasks we face every day." She looked at him and added, "Ready?" He nodded, folded his hands on the table and said, "Lead the way." The next 20 minutes, Jane's team introduced themselves and described their responsibilities. Priya explained how she designed graphics and social posts. Mark talked about analyzing data to target audiences. Tom shared how he managed project timelines and kept everyone on track. Others spoke of writing ad copy, coordinating with designers, and planning events. Avery listened closely, nodding and asking follow-up questions. He seemed genuinely curious about each detail, from the color choices of a logo to the scheduling of client calls. When the introductions ended, Jane clicked her pen and said, "Now I have some questions. Avery, as CEO, how do you decide which projects to support?" Avery leaned forward and said, "I think about the people behind the work. I ask myself, does this project help our clients? Does it align with our values? And very important, how will it affect our team?" He smiled. "If I don't understand your day-to-day challenges, I can't make good decisions." Mark raised his hand. "What challenges do you face as a leader?" Avery thought for a moment and answered, "Balancing big goals with small details. I need to see the big vision and the tiny nuts and bolts. That's why I spend time with maintenance and marketing. It helps me keep both views." He paused. "One of my hardest tasks is staying connected to the people who make this company run." He looked around the table. "That connection starts with listening." Jane nodded and said, "Thank you. We have one more question before we get to the hands-on part. How do you handle stress when deadlines loom?" Avery leaned back and smiled. "I break the day into small steps. I tackle one thing at a time, and I ask for help. There's no shame in admitting you can't do everything alone." He paused. In fact, asking for help builds trust and teamwork. Then Jane stood and said, "Now it's your turn, Avery." She handed him a stack of printed mock-up slides that needed comments. "We'd like you to review these slides as if you were a client. Tell us what stands out and what needs work." He took the slides and examined them thoughtfully. Flipped through each page, his brow furrowing in concentration. After a moment, he began to speak. He pointed out that the headline on slide 3 could be clearer. He suggested changing the order of data charts on slide 5 to match the narrative flow. He praised the team for their creative visuals, but encouraged more white space to improve readability. The team scribbled notes as he spoke, grateful for his insights. Next, Jane brought over a laptop and launched the analytics dashboard. She asked Avery to find the best performing social posts from the last campaign. He clicked through menus as if he had used the dashboard 100 times, filtering by date and engagement. He identified the top 3 posts with the highest, click-through rates, and explained why he thought they worked. Strong call to action, authentic images, and targeted hashtags. The team applauded his quick analysis. Finally, Jane led Avery to the whiteboard. She wrote brainstorm session at the top. She asked each team member to pitch a fresh campaign idea. Avery listened, offered feedback, and sketched rough diagrams. On the board, he asked questions that pushed the team to think deeper. What emotion do we want to evoke? How will we measure success? Who is our fiercest competitor? Under his guidance, the team refined an idea for a community event that combined a live workshop with a social media challenge. The room buzzed with energy. After 90 minutes of working together, Jane called time. She looked at Avery and said, "Thank you. This has been inspiring." Avery smiled and said, "Thank you all. I learned so much about your work, and I hope you learned a bit about mine." He stood and stretched. "Let me share one final thought. Leadership is about small acts, every single day. Fixing a copier, saving a file, listening to a team, those are the things that make a company strong." He paused. Never underestimate the power of doing the little things well. Jane felt a lump in her throat. She stood and clapped. Soon, the rest of the team joined, filling the room with applause and cheers. Some people gave Avery a thumbs up. Others shook his hand and thanked him for his time. The energy in the room felt electric. When the applause died down, Avery looked at Jane and said, "I have one more surprise. This afternoon, we're rolling out a new suggestion box program. Any employee can send me ideas or concerns directly, no filter. If it's something I can fix, I will. And if it's something we need to discuss, I'll organize a meeting." He paused. Because every voice matters. Jane felt tears prickle her eyes. She remembered the day the copier jammed and how a simple fix had saved her morning. She thought of Priya's lost file and the relief on her face when it was recovered. She thought of Mark stuck in the elevator and how a few moments of help had made his day. And now she saw how Avery's unseen service had led to a public commitment. A leader who cared about small problems and small people. As the workshop ended, the team gathered around a small table with snacks and coffee. Avery mingled, answering questions one-on-one and sharing stories of his own early days on a factory floor. Jane stood nearby, smiling as she watched her colleagues interact with him. This was the company she had always wanted to work for, one where every person mattered and every problem deserved attention. Late that afternoon, Jane returned to her desk. She opened her notebook to the first page and read the words "hands-on leadership" and "learn from the front lines." She closed the book and smiled. She reached for her phone and sent a message to Priya. "Best workshop ever." Priya replied with a thumbs-up emoji, and the words agreed. Jane sat back and reflected on the week. What had started with a jammed copier had grown into a movement, a simple idea that a leader could learn by doing small acts of service. She felt proud to be part of Brightwave and grateful for Avery's vision. She opened her email and drafted a note to her mentor, sharing her excitement and the lessons she had learned. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jane packed her things. She took one last look at the now empty conference room and whispered, "Thank you." She walked toward the exit, her steps light and sure. Outside, the city lights twinkled, and a gentle breeze carried the promise of tomorrow. She thought of the future, new campaigns to plan, new problems to solve, new opportunities to learn. And she knew that no matter what came next, she would. Remember the power of small acts, the value of listening, and the magic of a leader in disguise who fixed a copier and changed a company's heart.